Talk is a channel run by me and my business, Essence Holistic Health. And if you don't know me, my name is Shantae Anderson, and I am a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Oregon and Washington. I'm also a certified health coach and a Reiki practitioner. I'm also a yoga teacher as well. And I have a very holistic way that I work with my clients, and I am here to provide education on all things neurodiverse and trauma related in a holistic fashion. So sit tight, and today we're going to dive into sensory processing differences for neurodivergent people. Do you often get told that you're too sensitive, or when somebody asks you how you feel, you really don't know? So you say, I don't know, or I don't know how I feel? Or will you often kind of find yourself saying, like, what do you mean, feel my feelings? If these things resonate with you, you might have some sensory processing differences. And sensory processing is something that both neurotypical and neurodivergent people have, but neurodivergent individuals are often just more impacted by sensory processing differences. And what are sensory processing, or what is sensory processing? Sensory processing is essentially our ability to intake and process all of our sensory input. There are our five common senses that we know, such as taste, touch, smell, hearing, and vision. But there's also hidden senses that oftentimes get overlooked. And our hidden senses are our vestibular system, which is kind of our equilibrium, our ability to balance, things of that nature. It also involves motion sickness. So if you get motion sickness really easy, your vestibular system might be a little bit off. Another hidden sensory system is proprioception, which is sensing our body in space, being able to dance, move through space without knocking things over. Sometimes what I can see is that individuals with some proprioception issues constantly are bumping their hips or their arms on things, maybe walking on their tiptoes or the sides of their feet. There's also a lot of rocking, swaying, spinning as well, because that's very relaxing to the system, but also helps people judge where they are in space. Another hidden sense is our interoceptive awareness. And this is our internal sense. So, what are we feeling in our body? And this might be things like hunger, thirst, going to the bathroom, like that sense that we need to, and also having awareness of what emotions we're feeling in our body. And the last hidden sensory system is our exteroceptive awareness. And this is being able to sense the outside world around us. And often I find people are either really hyper or hyposensitive. And this might be kind of equated to like feeling the vibe in the room, or being able to sense energy, or just being really aware of what's going on in the space around you. So we have our five senses that we typically think about with our sensory systems, but we also have those hidden senses that have to be taken into account when we're talking about sensory processing differences. Now, like I mentioned earlier, all individuals, whether you're neurodivergent or not, have sensory processing needs, or they have sensory needs. But what I find is that ADHDers and autistic individuals have sensory sensitivities or processing issues that have to be taken into account, and their sensory needs might be more than the next person's. Oftentimes, ADHDers or autistic individuals will engage in self-stimming behaviors to increase or decrease sensory information and to often self-soothe. And this might look like playing with your hair, or picking at the skin or your fingernails, wiggling your feet, bouncing your leg, tapping your fingers, swaying, pacing. It could be like, the dreaded pen clicking, or just like constantly playing with a pen in your fingers. These are all just very different examples of self-stimming that I often see. And the reason that individuals self-stim is because they need to either increase or decrease their sensory information. And like I said, sensory regulation is extremely important, and people need sensory regulation to be regulated emotionally. So if they're not regulating their sensory needs, they're not going to be regulating their emotions. And so it's really important that neurodivergent individuals are able to find some self-stims and ways to increase or decrease their sense input as needed. which then this opens up the conversation into why paying attention to sensory needs is so important. People really need to take the time to pay attention to what do they need and when do they need it. So for an example, it might be that the grocery store, going into that is very overwhelming for a lot of people, neurodivergent or not. But a neurodivergent person might walk in there, and because they have bottom up processing, their brain isn't able to filter out what's information that's needed or not needed. So as they're walking through the grocery store, their brain and their nervous system and their body is taking in all this information, all the sights, all the sounds, all of the smells, all of, potentially if there's sampling sections, like there's so much going on, and the brain isn't able to go like, that's not needed, we can filter out this noise, don't pay attention to the lights over there. The brain's not able to do that. So all of this sensory information is just enclosing in on this person until they reach a point where it's too overwhelming, and then they might feel shut down, or they might then feel anxiety and feel kind of panicked. So this is an example of why sensory regulation and also paying attention to like what are you sensitive to and what are you not sensitive to is so important. Because if we can identify that it's really the sounds in the grocery store that's way too overwhelming, like there's the background music and there's too many people talking, and then there's cart noises and there's refrigerators and fluorescent lights are making all these sounds, then we can compensate for that. We can take some noise canceling headphones in, we can play music. There's all different types of things that somebody could do to be able to regulate that need once we identify that it's an issue. Okay, so what I just described in the grocery store is something that can be called sensory overload or sensory overwhelm. And what is sensory overload? Sensory overload happens when our brains are overwhelmed by way too much sensory input, such as sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. And this can also include movements, energies, internal sensations, external sensations. All of these things can contribute to sensory overwhelm. And when sensory overwhelm occurs, our nervous system just becomes bombarded and our balance is disrupted, and it becomes very hard to regulate our behaviors and our emotions and to be able to stay level headed or centered in those moments. So, this is why prioritizing and honoring sensory needs is so important. But like I mentioned before, you first have to figure out what your sensory needs are. And a part of this is identifying what are your triggers. So some very common triggers that I see for sensory overload in general is loud noises, bright lights, strong smells, crowded spaces, high frequency sounds, too many sounds, certain textures, extreme temperatures, much information all at once, intense emotions in the area around you, and too much task switching in a short amount of time. And sensory overload can present in a lot of different ways, but commonly what I see is in the moment, like that heightened anxiety that I mentioned earlier, irritability, restlessness, difficulty concentrating, physical discomfort, difficulty regulating emotions, paralysis, or having a lot of difficulty making decisions, meltdowns, and then shutdowns. And shutdowns are a little bit different than meltdowns. Shutdowns often can include fatigue, brain fog, disassociation. It's like the person just kind of withdraws, becomes really quiet, kind of really keeps to themselves. It's more of an internal experience, I feel, versus like a meltdown where it's a little bit more external, and that might lead to like crying, sometimes involving a panic attack. It's more of an external way to express it. So like I mentioned before, it's really important to identify what are your triggers and how does it present for you. That way you can start to create a sensory plan. And a sensory plan is, again, identifying your needs and identify your triggers, but then create some management strategy, like I mentioned before, like the headphones in the grocery store. And you want to identify things that help soothe but can also stimulate, because in some situations maybe there's not enough sensory input. Like if you're stuck in a staff meeting and the content is really boring to you and you're really not engaged, you're probably going to need some stimulation to be able to, one, stay engaged in the staff meeting, but to two, maybe not fall asleep. So being able to have both things that soothe and relax, but then also stimulate and help increase awareness and concentration and just increase sensory information can be helpful as well. So some common accommodations that I often recommend just to start playing with and trying at the beginning of creating a sensory implant is using noise canceling headphones, wearing sunglasses or blue light blocking glasses, even if you're not around electronics, because these things can help reduce overhead lights, especially fluorescent lighting. If you work in a building that has a lot of that, those are often very triggering to neurodivergent individuals and can cause headaches or migraines for people. So wearing sunglasses, blue light blocking glasses can be actually very helpful. And then also starting with just carrying around some fidgets. It's a really easy way to kind of play with like what fidgets work for you and which ones help provide maybe relaxation or stimulation when you need it. I also think that it's important to create or find sensory safe spaces, whether that be in your home or if you're at work. Some work facilities even have like a quiet room or something along that nature. So just being able to identify somewhere at work, at home, wherever you need that you can go, you just need a moment to relax, to be able to soothe whatever it is. And being able to have these things in a kit written down, like in the notes section of your phone, whatever it is that helps you remember that these things are available to you. One thing I also think is important is kind of creating a plan for emergencies as well. So this might be like if you find that you shut down or down a lot, sometimes even like ordering some like business cards that have like, hi, I'm ADHD or autistic, my name is this, if I'm not talking it's because I'm overwhelmed, and it's not that I'm being rude. You can kind of put your own flavor to it, but essentially being able to have something that you can just hand to somebody, like if you get pulled over by a cop, that could be a common place where people shut down or even melt down. And it's just because even if they haven't done anything wrong, they're just really overwhelmed by all of that and they can't function. And then that can lead to more issues. So being able to hand this card over so that the cop or whoever it is that you're interacting with can have an understanding of what is going on, why is this happening, without you having to pull yourself together in that moment and share all of this information. It can just be like written down on a card or even the note section of your phone, and you can hand your phone over, whatever you're comfortable with. But I also think that having something like that for emergencies is really helpful as well. So after taking some time to learn about sensory processing differences and what sensory overwhelm is and what we can do to try to mediate that, I want to leave you with a couple questions just to help you explore this a bit for yourself. So the first question is, what are some common sensory challenges that you face? Maybe take a moment to think about that, to write it down, and to just think about those challenges. And then maybe kind of explore, like in the past, how did you work on overcoming those challenges? Was there anything that was helpful, or do you feel like you need to start from scratch and figure something out? And maybe even outside of those challenges, how do you think that you cope with sensory overload, or when you are sensory seeking? How do you do that? Do you go to video games? Do you eat a lot of snacks? Do you go for a walk? Do you journal? Do you stretch? It can be anything, but how do you cope when you are in sensory overload or sensory seeking? And the last one is, I want you to just take some time to think about and identify like what are some possible triggers that you have, and then how can you use very specific strategies to help overcome or to help mediate and lower these things. I hope that this video was helpful in terms of learning some sensory processing differences and what all of this encompasses for neurodivergent individuals. And hopefully these questions kind of help you explore a bit about your sensory processing differences, whether you are neurodivergent or not. Again, we all have sensory needs and we all need to learn about them and learn how to mediate them when they do come up. So I want to thank you so much for joining me today in this video, and if you want to subscribe or follow, just click that button and I will be producing more neurodivergent content along with some trauma content as well, coming from a holistic fashion. Anyways, take care, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.